Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Joshua Logie, and I'll be your host for today's webinar, Designing Your EUDR Compliance Framework. We'll discuss tools, tips, and common traps to avoid. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. To ask questions during the webinar, please type your questions into the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll address some questions at the end of the presentation, but if we don't get to your question, we will follow up after the event. And we'll be emailing all registrants a link to the download for the recording and for the webinar slides, and that'll be on Friday morning. So please be on the lookout for those in your inbox. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us at marketing@sourceintel.com. And today we'll be focusing on solutions to EUDR. If you're looking to get granular with specific deadlines, requirements, or exemptions, we've put together an awesome library of EUDR-based resources for you to check out. And there you'll have access to regulatory blogs, ebooks, on-demand webinars, newsletters, and various accredited courses over at the Resources Center and at academy.sourceintelligence.com. And as an introduction to our panelists today, Charles Getter is a sustainability consultant with a focus on deforestation and regulations. His career background in construction, having worked on major highways and buildings with a focus on environmental impact assessment, low carbon design and biodiversity, net gain, which all bring a net wealth of knowledge to the team here. Charles completed his Bachelor of Science in Geography at Keele University and a Master's of Science in Environmental Management at Lancaster University. Welcome, Charles. We have Sam Fleming, who is an Earth observation specialist focused on ecosystem mapping and protection, leading the customer success team over at EarthBlocks. And his work ensures that customers leverage the EarthBlocks platform for advancing sustainability initiatives. So previously, Sam was a consultant and project manager at geospatial consultancy firm Carbomap, delivering to a global suite of customers, and served as a carbon consultant for a SaaS specializing in carbon accounting. He holds a Master of Science in Remote Sensing from University College London, and Sam's career is dedicating to marrying technology with sustainability and helping organizations achieve their environmental goals. Welcome as well, Sam. Beth Allen is a director of solutions consulting and a CMAP platform expert. And Beth is based in Ottawa, Canada. She has over 20 years of experience as a sales engineer, 6 of which have been spent demonstrating the value of product compliance and ESG solutions to complex manufacturers. And lastly, of course, there's myself. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Josh, and I'm an account executive here at Source. I work closely with companies to understand their compliance challenges and to help connect them with the right tools and solutions. So whether that's navigating new regulations like EUDR or scaling existing programs more efficiently, I'm here to help as well. So we do have an awesome agenda pack for today. First, we'll give you a fundamental overview of the regulation itself, focusing on distill aspects that we think are crucial for you to know. This will also involve covering your core obligations, and we'll discuss the 4 main pillars of EUDR compliance, which will lead us into our suggestions to building an actual compliant program. And then, being a technology first provider ourselves, we'll look to discuss tech's role in simplifying compliance with EUDR. And of course, we've left time at the end for a live Q&A session. But with that said, I'll kick it over to Charles to help us understand EUDR at that fundamental level.
Thank you very much, Josh. So starting with understanding the EUDR. So the EU Deforestation Regulation, or the EUDR, has been around for a few years now, and it came into force back in 2023, repealing the EU Timber Regulation, or the EUTR, which focused mainly on illegal logging. As for EUTR only focused largely on illegal logging, it was not doing enough to combat the global deforestation and biodiversity crisis, and as such, the EU Deforestation Regulation was enacted. The EUDR expands on the limited EUDR scope to include more commodities, so palm oil, coffee, rubber, beef, soy, cocoa, all commodities other than timber, which cause massive or in many cases much higher rates of deforestation due to their intense requirement for agricultural land. And the EUDR also goes further than the requirement to source those commodities legally, requiring all of those commodities to be sourced completely deforestation free and also accompanied by a due diligence statement. So the EUDR entered into force back in summer of 2023, but the rules begin to apply after a few changes and delay at the end of this year, with 6 more months for micro and small enterprises. So who does the EUDR apply to? Well, provided you are selling products that are covered by the Annex 1 list in the EUDR regulation, you have operators who are the companies first placing or exporting goods on or from the EU market, and traders who are the companies distributing those goods commercially. And if you're an operator, you're fully obligated and you need to do full due diligence. If you're a trader, it's much the same, unless you're an SME trader, and then you only need to do partial due diligence, which includes mainly just the recording of basic details. And importantly, if you're further down the supply chain or specifically a trader, it's quite likely at this point that an operator has already done due diligence. So you should note that it is possible to retrieve existing due diligence statements from the EU information system. And if you can validate them, then it is possible to reuse them. So those were the main rules of the EUDR. What are the core compliance obligations? Well, proving compliance starts with the requirement for a due diligence statement and also data collection as prescribed in Article 9 of the regulation. Companies must submit a due diligence statement before import or export with any Annex 1 commodities or products. And in that statement, you must confirm that risk assessment was completed and declare negligible risk of deforestation or illegality. This is a legal obligation under the EUDR, and Annex 2 of the regulation lays out exactly the information that needs to be included in the statement. And Article 9 of the regulation for information collection goes further, describing the exact measures required by the EUDR due diligence process. So information includes description of products, quantity, supplier or buyer names, deforestation-free and legality evidence, and then also country of production, and very importantly, geolocation. On geolocation, you need to have full traceability to the plot, so companies must identify where their products were produced. This means you need to capture precise coordinates for every sourcing location to a specific level of high detail. And importantly, you must do this for every sourcing location. So some of the more agricultural commodities, the farmed ones such as rubber, coffee, cocoa, soy, palm oil, etc., they often are associated with many different smallholder farmers with middlemen who collect the commodities and stockpile them. So you end up with products which may potentially be linked to various plots of land. And it's important to make sure that you're tracing all of those at the individual farm level. So in addition to data collection, it's also important to consider risk assessment that is described in Article 10 of the regulation and mitigation in Article 11. Once you've collected all of that information, it's really important to know your risk and then act on it. So the EUDR requires that you take that information collected and then do a risk assessment using that data as well as other indicators. If your risk assessment highlights any risks, for example, a high risk of forced labour, or you found that your plots are associated with deforestation or even circumvention of the regulation, then it's really important to mitigate that risk. If it's not possible to do so, then your product might not make it through EU customs. And it's possible to demonstrate legal sourcing at every level. So on this slide, we have quite a big table full of legality categories, which roughly align with Articles 9 and 10 of the EUDR, and coinciding examples of acceptable documents that you might be able to use to prove legality or use in your information collection and risk assessment. As you can see, there are loads of them, and you can probably imagine that documents can be hard to verify and quite easy to forge. And also, there's an issue that large supply chains are often multi-country, and a lot of those documents are going to be in foreign languages, so hard to understand and trace. Underpinning all of those documents, we've included certification because it's another important tool that you should consider, notably chain of custody. FSC and PFC are organisations that you might have already heard of. They certify timber and also rubber against very detailed standards, and also at every stage of the supply chain. So they can definitely be used to demonstrate legal sourcing, and is proof of other things, but it's really important to be aware that having certified products does not mean that you're automatically compliant. You still need to go through the due diligence process as laid out by the regulation. Next is how to build a compliant EUDR program. And we have divided EUDR compliance into 4 pillars, starting with number 1, mapping your supply chain end to end, followed by the collection and validation of geolocation data, as well as other information documents that you've collected at plot level 2. Third is the risk assessment that we mentioned, using real-world indicators, as well as the collected information, and then coming up with any mitigation plans if you have detected any risks in your supply chain. Once you've done all of this, you can be confident and therefore submit your due diligence statement with confidence. It's important to note that if you're collecting all of that information, you technically could complete the due diligence statement, but you wouldn't want to do that without analysing the information first and checking your farms and coordinates. So pillar number 1 involves tracing the full journey of every product, all the way from the producer and the farm through primary processing, all the way to the EU market entry. In 2025, most supply chains are massive. They have a lot of tiers, they have many actors, and often different countries where a product moves from country to country. So it's really important to identify all supply chain actors and map exactly how those products move. And that should include volumes and countries. And by doing this, you can spot any gaps early and then come up with a mitigation plan. Another part of a compliant EUDR program should be based on the collection of plot level geolocation data. As mentioned, it's one of the main requirements of the EUDR to collect that information, and you have to pinpoint down to the plot level and get really precise on where your products are coming from. You have to collect that plot level geolocation, and like I said earlier, it's all very well having that data, but ideally you want to validate it using satellite tools, and before putting those products onto the market, ascertain whether there are any issues with that plot, for example, deforestation detected, and then you flag any issues and do something about them. And if you have all of those elements to your EUDR program, then you should be able to submit with confidence. You compile all of the supply chain data, you declare negligible risk, provided that you didn't detect any risks when you did your risk assessment, log any decisions, and then submit your due diligence statement before you place those products on the EU market or export them. And if you don't have a statement, then you risk no entry onto the market. Next is technology's role in simplifying EUDR compliance. As we've discussed throughout the first part of this webinar, modern supply chains are big and they're complex, so mapping them and tracing products manually can be almost impossible at times. The reality is that without technology, you may miss risk hotspots, fail to prove or verify where a product came from, and therefore risk a slower time to market, or in the worst case, blocked market access. And there's significant reputational and financial risks that come with not having compliance when you are sending these goods onto the EU market. And if you look at the EUDR, historically, the timber regulation, quite a few companies were subject to very hefty fines. So it's something you should expect towards the end of the year when the EUDR application date kicks in. And this is where we come in. So Source Intelligence is a global leader in supply chain compliance software and managed services. And we have an EUDR compliance solution that we have divided roughly 4 ways, starting with supply chain mapping. We use technology to trace the origin of products across tiers in real time, and that allows you to identify gaps and missing data early. We also have an automated due diligence system, which helps you with data collection, data storage, but also risk assessment, and therefore risk mitigation. That's all centralized in one platform. And also EU Traces integration. We're fully integrated to the EU Traces system or the EU information system. And as such, we can submit due diligence statements on your behalf as authorized representatives under the EUDR. And finally, geolocation risk screening. We work with Earthblocks, who provide satellite-powered monitoring, and Article 9 aligned risk scoring, surface deforestation and sourcing risks before they escalate. And that's something Sam will go into in more detail after me. So this is what our combined solution looks like. You have the Source Intelligence EUDR solution, where we collect product and purchase order information, tier 1 suppliers, and we map and register plots, and then combined with the satellite checks from Earthblocks, we create a risk result, a due diligence statement too, that can then be submitted automatically to the EU information system. And next, Sam is going to go through the Earthblocks part of this solution, followed by Beth's demo.
Thank you very much, Charles. I'm Sam Fleming, co-founder of Earthblocks. Earthblocks is a geospatial analytics platform that is focused on nature and climate. We deliver satellite-derived insights on things like deforestation risk across global supply chains. We enable companies to conduct risk assessments rapidly and at scale without the need for coding expertise or experience in using satellite data. We work with large corporates, financial institutions, not just on regulatory compliance, but also helping them to embed nature and climate into their day-to-day operations. We were founded by Earth observation and domain experts with decades of experience working at the interface of science, technology, and business. As we've heard from Charles, we are seamlessly integrated into Source Intelligence, and so I'm excited to be here today to tell you a bit more about how they are operationalizing geospatial data within their solution. So let's see how it works. So it's a 3-step process. The first is to identify and respond to risks in supply chain, and we do that by determining forest cover in December 2020, which is the EUDR baseline date. And this is essential because if there were no forests, then there was no deforestation. And so we do this by overlaying the plot coordinates with a number of trusted data sets. Each data set has a degree of uncertainty, so all of them have a degree of uncertainty there, and so we mitigate this by combining them together to give an overall likelihood of forest. The black areas are where all the data sets are in agreement, there's no forests. The green is the flip, where they're saying, yeah, all of this is forest, and yellow is that area where there's maybe some disagreement between some of the data sets. So moving on to the second step. So step 2 takes this further, and it's about identifying deforestation after this baseline date. Again, we're combining multiple data sets to mitigate limitations of any one. And here we're looking to track changes at a high resolution, so identifying forest disturbance or loss since January 21. And really this is to flag suspicious activity. The outputs here are in a traffic light system where green is low risk of deforestation having occurred and red is high risk. So, to bring all of this together in the third step, we are combining steps 1 and 2 to give an overall risk for each plot. This allows you to triage and prioritise your due diligence efforts. The highest risk areas are going to be where there was definitely forest in 2020 and there has definitely been loss since. But obviously the real world is more complicated than that. So let's see a real location. Red is the highest risk, and so that definitely needs further investigation. You can do this by doing a deep dive using high resolution satellite data, such as that available from Planet, which you can access through EarthBlocks, or by putting boots on the ground and engaging more directly with the producers at this site. But if we see this site actually also has some areas that are amber too. So these are that kind of middle area. And so again, we would recommend you do a deep dive on these two. This is not a compliance guarantee, so even if everything was green, but really what it means is your compliance teams can focus their resources on the areas that they are needed most. So, to summarise why geospatial technology adds value to this process, we've heard that managing your EUDR compliance manually can be really time consuming, it can be really difficult to scale. And so that's where bringing geospatial data sets and work into your workflow can make such a difference. The risk scoring with Earthbox gives you clear data-driven deforestation risk insights. And of course, it's fully integrated into your existing process. There are several advantages to doing it this way. So we can give faster insights at scale, so moving from days of manual analysis per site to literally minutes by doing cloud processing. We offer the ability for investigation and repeatability, so drill down using some of the in-platform tools, or repeat assessments for continuous monitoring. The data you're using is always current and always trusted. We're continuously updating the platform, bringing in the latest satellite and environmental data sets to give you the most accurate and most current view of what's happening on the ground. And of course, every output is traceable, using standardized methods, trusted data sets that evolve as regulations, as methodologies develop, which ultimately gives you the confidence and documentation that you will need for compliance. And of course, we're integrated with source intelligence, which is where the insights are delivered and where your team works. Thank you, and over to you, Beth.
Thank you, Sam, and hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to show you a sneak peek into the Source Intelligence EUDR solution. This demonstration will focus on wood, but the platform does support the broader spectrum of commodities covered under the EUDR. I will briefly cover how the solution can help you meet your due diligence obligations, identify and mitigate risk in your supply chain, and submit your EUDR reports directly to the EU Traces system. Let's get started with our fictitious customer, Glendale Incorporated. Glendale is a distributor of this wooden garden table, which they buy from their supplier, Alfresco Living. Automated outreach to the supplier, as well as our integration with EarthBlocks, helps to determine and mitigate risks, allowing Glendale to produce a due diligence statement which will be sent to the EU Traces system, thus allowing this product to be placed on the EU market. Now let's dive a little deeper to see how we got here. When Glendale provided us this SKU, along with this product's HS code, our system automatically identifies whether it's in scope for EUDR or if extra questions must be answered by the supplier before making this determination. This product is in scope, so our managed services team will initiate an outreach to Alfresco Living so they can create what we call a unique material source for each raw material contained in this table. In this case, there are two, The table legs are made out of timber, and the table top is made of a timber composite. A unique material source, or UMS, is required for each one. A UMS is essentially a supply chain map which traces this raw material all the way back to its origin or origins and can be tied to other products using this same material and supplier. In this case, this timber composite comes from 2 different places. If we go into the details of this UMS and look at the risk assessment details, we can see the various risk indicators and their status, as well as the plot information, which is required to meet your obligations. This is where our partnership with Earthblocks comes into play. This plot information is seamlessly transferred to Earthblocks via an integration. Earthblocks then returns the plot mapping visualization and timeline views to our solution. We can clearly see from this image on the right that compared to 2020, many roads have been created and the area has far fewer trees. There's also a timeline view which shows these changes happening over time. In addition to the plot mapping visualization, Earthblocks returned a deforestation risk of high, which alerts our team that additional information is required from this supplier to mitigate this risk. In this case, the supplier did provide documentation that showed the operator had valid concessions and necessary permits which were agreed to and legal before the EUDR cutoff. Due to this, the risk after mitigation was able to be set to low risk. So let's review. With the Source Intelligence Platform and Managed Services team, Glendale has been able to meet their EUDR due diligence obligations of supplier outreach, supply chain traceability, risk assessment and mitigation, and reporting to the EU Traces system, and retaining all records in a single system of record. They are now free to ship this product within the EU. As I mentioned, this has been a brief sneak peek into how we can help you comply with your EUDR obligations. Please reach out to us if you would like to know more. Now back over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Beth. So to conclude, what can you do today to start preparing? Well, firstly, identify your tier 1 suppliers and basic points of contact. This is going to greatly help you with the data collection phase of your due diligence process. Secondly is to identify your eligible SKUs as well as their harmonized system codes or HS codes using Annex 1. It's important to scope exactly which products that you sell are actually on the EUDR list and therefore covered. And thirdly, identify bill of materials for your eligible SKUs and material information for those products. That's going to help you with your risk assessment. The EUDR is complex, but you're not alone in navigating it, so feel free to contact Source Intelligence for support. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Charles. And just for some final thoughts from us, the EUDR isn't just another regulation, it's a full transformation of how global supply chains are expected to operate. Companies that will wait will be reacting, and companies that act now will be leading. Our 3 key takeaways here are: number 1, start building now. The regulation is live. Your supply chain map, geolocation data, and risk assessments will take time. So don't wait until enforcement catches up. Number 2 is, manual processes won't scale. So you need real-time visibility, verifiable data, and defensible documentation. So that means leveraging technology and not spreadsheets. Number 3 is compliance is possible. with the right partner. So you don't have to do it alone. EUDR is complex, but with the right systems and support, it's absolutely manageable. So if you're not sure where to start, you can reach out to the compliance experts at Source Intelligence and Earthblocks. We're ready to help you dive into EUDR with confidence. And then that would actually conclude our prepared content for today. For this Q&A session, I'll be looking at the questions inputted into that GoToWebinar questions box. I'll read the questions and then we'll have one of our experts here to answer. And as I mentioned earlier, if there's any questions that we don't get to today, we'll make sure to follow up after the event. So I'll go through these here now. So is it possible to complete an Article 9 deforestation risk assessment without using geospatial data? And if so, what are the alternatives? Sam, I'll turn that one to you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So, I mean, I guess we heard earlier from Charles that there's always a degree of geospatial that needs to go into this. You need to know exactly where the commodity you are purchased was grown. But do you need to do the satellite mapping? I guess again the answer is maybe no. But you need to do something. So whether that's boots on the ground, going and visiting the site, or doing more in-depth engagement with the supplier, or getting an independent party to go and visit the location, you could certainly do it that way, and that maybe works quite well if you've only got a handful of locations. But actually, for most of the organizations we work with, they have global supply chains, and so quite simply, going out to visit every single site is just not possible. And so that's where the kind of geospatial data comes in. It allows you to kind of really focus and prioritize that activity.
Great, thanks, Sam. How do you comply with the EUDR if sourcing from China, just due to prohibitions on geodata?
Yeah, I can take that one. So this is quite a common question when it comes to EUDR compliance, because as we know, geolocation information is essential. And actually, but there isn't a specific prohibition on geolocation data when it comes to the EUDR under Chinese law. The situation is fairly complex with various different laws on data privacy and geodata, but most of the laws that do exist relate rather to specific features such as military compounds. So my advice would be to actually start your due diligence as early as possible and simply talk to your suppliers also as early as possible to see how you can get around this uncertainty. But essentially, there is no concrete prohibition on collecting the required data for the EUDR unless your situation is quite specific.
Great, thanks, Charles. And if we do step one with Earthblocks and it shows no forest, then why do we need step two? Sam, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I guess the reality is if it's been identified as no forest, it's likely to end up at that low risk end. But again, if you've got sites all over the world, knowing that these ones are low risk is good. But I guess if you then go on to do that kind of deforestation step and it says, oh yeah, there's definitely deforestation, that suggests that either one of those kind of those kind of insights is incorrect, and so it's worth going back and doing a double check. Or it might even suggest that your plot location is incorrect. And so really, by doing both steps of that process, you're kind of making absolutely certain you know what's going on.
Thanks, Sam. Maybe another one here for you. So why are you using all of these data sets? Surely JRC data set is enough?
Yeah, I mean, so the JRC dataset is obviously really good, but as I kind of explained, every dataset has limitations. The JRC one, we know that kind of boundary between forest and non-forest can sometimes be a bit uncertain. And so by layering up these different data sets, what we can do is we can make sure that we're not missing anything. And so you're giving yourself more confidence. And that's why you get this kind of priority rating. Does everything agree? Does everything not? What happens in the middle? And again, it's kind of making sure that you're being as rigorous as possible in that kind of assessment.
Great, thanks, Sam. What is the latest on the EU benchmarking data?
Yeah, I can take that one. So under the EUDR, benchmarking was proposed as a way to essentially screen products based on their country of origin and allow simplified due diligence for any countries in the data set that were allocated as low. This took quite a while for the EU to release, but eventually it came about in May. But only 4 countries were on that list and classified as high risk, and they were all mainly sanctioned countries and quite obvious ones, such as Belarus, Russia, North Korea, Myanmar. Um, as a result, the benchmarking has been pretty controversial because some countries see standard or high risk allocation almost as a condemnation and something quite damaging to their reputation and their economy. Um, And on the other hand, the high risk countries are also quite questionable because some of the big ones didn't make it onto that list. Uh, as such, there was a vote quite recently in European Parliament essentially rejecting that benchmarking data. So for now, it's looking a bit uncertain. Nothing has changed currently, so you can use that benchmarking data as it is, but it's likely that something will change in the future, and that could either mean the data set is improved or it could go in the opposite direction where even more countries are allocated low risk when they should perhaps be standard or high. But for now, it's only speculative. But what we do know is that there's been a vote that rejects the initial data set.
All right, thanks, Charles. Another question here. Does every batch or shipment require its own due diligence statement?
Yes, I can take that one too. So no, you don't have to submit due diligence statements for every batch or shipment. You can and perhaps should, because if you do it in this way, all of your products are going to be much more traceable. But actually, there is an option to submit statements in excess for up to a year's worth of product, and as long as all of those plots that are on the statement are compliant. And of course, as long as the volume that you're placing on the market doesn't exceed the volume that is on your statement, because otherwise you have a problem. But if you're declaring not on the shipment or batch level, you're probably going to have much bigger plots, bigger farms, or maybe more of them. And if only one of those farms does not comply, suddenly that entire stockpile, the entire quantity on that statement is completely non-compliant. So I would say it's a riskier way of doing things, but no, you don't have to do shipment or batch. You've got options, and I'd recommend looking into the recent FAQs released by the EU on this. They're quite useful, and they go into a lot more detail.
Great, thanks, Charles. Last question I'll go through here. Some global forest data sets have been shown to misclassify commodity plantations like cocoa or rubber as natural forest, which can lead to false positives under the EUDR. So how does Earthblocks address this challenge and improve classification accuracy? Sam, obviously that one's for you.
Yeah, I think that one's for me. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. But that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where every data set has their own limitations, and so if you're just relying on one, you've got a much higher chance of making a mistake somewhere. And so again, by layering up these different data sets, you can help mitigate some of these things. I mean, I think specifically on, particularly in terms of kind of existing plantations, there are a lot of kind of bodies that are looking at this and working on it. So the Forest Data Partnership is really one example. And so they are producing commodity specific data sets. And again, within Earthblocks, we are bringing those in as they become available. So again, using Earthblocks through kind of source intelligence means you are at that cusp of what is the best available data to help us do that. So yeah, that's kind of how we address and improve over time on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. And if you are looking to increase your knowledge, don't forget to head over to Source Academy we've added an on-demand course focusing on the mitigation and deforestation with responsible sourcing. So you can scan the QR code and that'll take you right over to the enrollment for that. And then obviously we wanted to thank you once again, and thanks for attending the webinar here. Your feedback is very important to us. So we do have another QR code here to provide or to actually take you right to the participation for the post-webinar survey. We really appreciate your feedback. So that would be great if you could take some extra time to fill that out for us. But other than that, thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.